This conference will now be recorded.
Yes, does anyone have any questions before we can get started? Anyone, any questions again? We were just creating a simple app service yesterday, and we said what is an app service plan, what is an app service, and we also looked at how to do it with an ARM template. We said how do you go ahead and do this one with the ARM template out here. We also deployed the ARM template using a PowerShell script. So yesterday we did a new hyphen easy resource group deployment and deployed the ARM template inside a particular resource group out here, and this is where we are. So we have the app service plan, we have the app service, and yesterday we were finding it a little bit of, let's say, struggle with the WinSAP to transfer all our files. So we'll try to understand, or we'll try to, let's say, resolve that particular error today. We'll see how it goes. Yes. So yes, anyone, any questions till here? Anyone, anything till here before I get started? So again, as I was telling, WinSAP is nothing but a file transfer protocol mechanism, and web applications support FTP and FTPS, both file transfer protocol, secure file transfer protocol, non-secure, and etc. Which means as a user from my local laptop, I will be able to go ahead and transfer my files from one destination to the other, from a local destination to the remote server, and I am looking at one particular folder called site www root folder of my web app. This is where I want to transfer my files from my local machine, so that my app service has some HTML or some custom content here, and I want to display that particular content over the internet out here. This is what I want to do. Again, yesterday we had some issues with the WinSCP tool, so we'll try to see what are the issues out here and etc. So firstly, let's go here. This is the web application name that I have, which is dev web app xyz000, and this is in a running state. It's running on a plan called F1 free plan, and I have the host name. I also have the URL, and if I click on the URL, this is a HTTPS URL. If you look at this, it's a HTTPS secured site. When we were doing a virtual machine, we got a HTTP, not a HTTPS. And this HTTPS is being maintained by Microsoft only. I'm not doing anything with this one. And this is the default page that I do have, which is all these things out. One thing that I want to do before I go ahead and do the FTP is that I realize that the app services do not support FTP out of the box. When you create the app service, earlier it used to support FTPs and all these things out. Now they're not really supporting FTP. It's only supporting an FTPS protocol. And if you want an FTP, just go to configuration. Here you have something called configuration. These are the settings of the app service. Just go to the configuration out here, and once this configuration loads, there is a setting that I need to update. So there's something called app settings, there's something called general settings and all these things. Let's go to this one called general settings. Let's go to the general settings out here. Just go here, and the FTP state is disabled. By default, the FTP is disabled. Just say all allowed. I'll save this out. That was the issue that I was facing yesterday. Earlier, I think this was a new update. Earlier, when you just create a web application, it was directly supporting the FTP out of the box. But this time around, they are going ahead and disabling this out. So all I did is went into the configuration, into the general settings of the configuration, just scroll down and make sure that the FTP here, which is, let's say, this particular property, please make sure it is all allowed out here. And let's go back to the application, and let's get something called as the publishing profile. So I'll get the publishing profile. This will give me the username, the password, and all the settings that I need to go ahead and do an FTP connection. And let's look at the download folder. So I have the FTP folder. I also have my templates. I also have some HTML templates, sorry, inside this particular folder. And let me open this out. I have the username, I have the password here. So if you look at this one, I have all these things that I need, which is the publishing URL. I have the username out here. If I just scroll towards the right, I have the username, I have the user password, and these are the two things that I'm actually looking at, which is the username and the user password out here. So what I'll do is I'll just go back, copy the FTP hostname, and then go into a tool called WinSCP and open up this particular tool. And I'll say new session. I'll paste the FTP hostname here. Take the username and password right now from my publishing setting file. So this is the username and this is the password basically that I got. So I'm copying the username out here, pasting the username, taking the password, copying it from, let's say, everything that is between the quotes. So I'll copy this out, paste it out here, and then try to do a login. Let's see if we are able to establish a session today. Again, it's trying to connect to that particular FTP and it's saying access denied. Let's do one thing. Let's copy this out once again. Yes, I think the password was not properly copied. And now I am inside a folder called what? Site www root. And inside this, I have a file called what? Hostingstart.html. The reason being you're able to see this web page. This web page that you're able to see is because of that particular file in place. And I did not, let's say, log into the machine. I did not install IIS. I didn't do anything. It's a platform as a service. Microsoft installed the IIS. Microsoft put that particular file in, and it's now giving me like a package and exposing everything to the internet right now. This is a pure application. This, let's say, or this is, let's say, a pure web application out here, which is internet facing. It has a public IP. It has all these things. We'll also look at the public IP of this one and all that stuff. But if I just come down and if I delete this file, so I can just click on this particular file, hit the delete button, it will remove this out. And if I just refresh this out, again, it'll throw me an error telling that you do not have permission to view this directory and etc. Which means that there are no files in that particular directory. There are no files that you need to, let's say, view. So let's go, and these are the two things. The left hand side of my screen, this is my local machine. All the files that are there in my local machine out here. The right side is the remote server. So I have two things, local machine and the remote server, and I'm trying to establish an FTP connection between my local and the remote, between two different machines out here. Again, if you're just copying or if you're just, let's say, transferring files in your laptop, it's called a copy operation. If you are copying it over to a server, it's called as an FTP operation out here, file transfer protocol mechanism. So what I'll do is I'll just click on this bar here, which tells me which location that I'm on right now. Do a double click and I'll say browse. Go to, let's say, the folder that all my, let's say, documents are there, which is downloads, or which is downloads. Let's see, where is downloads here? Downloads, inside which I have all these things. This is the folder in which I have all my HTML pages and etc. Or this is the folder where I have all these things. I'll say okay. I'll say okay. And now I'm inside this particular folder called eoc.html. And if I go inside this one, I have all these files, JS images and all these things. So I'll just copy everything or drag and drop. I'm dragging everything, selecting everything out here, drag and drop. I am just dragging it, dropping it to the other window. Meaning you can just do a copy and paste also, but a drag and drop is much more easier. So I'm dragging and dropping all the contents that are there inside my local machine into one specific directory of this particular remote repository, which is site and then root. This is the folder where I'm placing all my files out here. This is the folder where I'm placing, let's say, all the file structure out here. And let's allow it a minute or so for this particular deployment to go through. And once it goes through, let's understand what do you get out from this one and how do you, let's say, interact with your website and all these things out here. Is any questions still here? Anyone, any questions still here? This will take a minute, so I'm okay to take some questions out here. Yes, anyone, any questions still here that I can take? Yes, anyone, any questions still here that I can take here? Again, FTPs are a little slow because the amount of bandwidth that you get out here is, let's say, very less. And also, one thing that I want to just tell here is that FTP mechanism is not being used these days. A lot of companies are not using FTP mechanism these days, but we need to have an understanding. We need to have an idea, because if you tell that, you know what, I've been working with DevOps since the last 3 or 4 years and etc., you should have also known about FTP mechanism out here. So it's just an understanding on how do you transfer the files and all these things out here. So FTP mechanism is just a simple file transfer protocol. Just take a file from one, let's say, destination or source, and put it into a destination, which is the app service. These days, a lot of companies have moved towards a better way of doing things, which is using Visual Studio, Eclipse, something called as IDE, development environments. So we'll talk about that too. But a lot of companies right now are using DevOps practice to do all these deployment, not just from the local. They're using DevOps practice to do all these deployments, and that's what we are going to explore in DevOps. That whatever I'm doing manually right now, how can I enhance it using something known as DevOps out here? And what will I get when I do DevOps and all these things out here as such? So let's allow it a minute more. It'll just go and take these particular folders. Again, folders will take some time to kind of copy this out. And once all these are in, let's understand what really happens out here. So it's copying all these things called contacts and everything, and then everything now is copied from the left hand side to the right hand side, meaning from my local repository or my local system to, let's say, that particular remote server out here. And once this is copied, let's do a quick refresh. And as when I refresh, I have the entire HTML content out here displayed in the form of a website. It's again a very huge website. That's the reason it took a lot of time for you to, let's say, copy the content out. Again, you have about page, you have a lot of things out here, and you can go and design. If you are a HTML developer, you could have gone and designed all these pages, edited your contact number, put your contact number and all these things out here, etc., and your website is ready. This is what I did. I just downloaded the template, uploaded it inside my app service, and again, my app service is giving you a HTTPS link. This is a HTTPS link that I do have. Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure, meaning there is something called as an SSL certificate which is integrated with this particular website. SSL, Secure Socket Layer. If you click on this particular padlock, we call this as a padlock out here. It's saying connection is secure, and if I just let's say click on that particular connection secure, it's telling what certificate is valid. It's telling you have a certificate, valid information, which is given by Microsoft, and this is an SSL certificate, Secure Socket Layer, meaning all the connections that you go ahead and establish with this particular website are encrypted. That's what the SSL really tells you, meaning everything that is from your local machine. Let's say you are a user, there are multiple users out here that are connecting to my website, and let's say you're doing some credit card information, you're logging in all these things out here. All the connections between this website and your machine are going through an encrypted channel, meaning I, as a hacker, it'll become very difficult for me to go ahead and hack this particular connection if there is something known as an SSL implemented. Secure, secure socket layer out here. Again, we'll understand how do you do your own SSL certificates, how do you create your own SSL certificates, how do you create your own websites and all that stuff. This is something that we'll do. But here, in my case, SSL is also handled by Microsoft. I am not doing the SSL. Earlier, in a Windows virtual, I mean, meaning in a virtual machine, if I went ahead and did the same thing out here, SSL is something that I need to take care of, meaning I need to create my own certificate. I need to bind my SSL and all these things and make my website secure. But I did not have a certificate, so I did not do that. But here, Microsoft is taking care of the SSL as well. Yes, any questions still here? Anyone, any questions still here that I can take? Anyone, any questions that I can take till here? Let's see if there's anything in the chat window. There's one thing. Renewal of the SSL certificate will be taken care. We will be taken care, or do we do manually? Renewal of the SSL certificate, again, very good question. Is that this SSL certificate that you get with a free plan or with the app service is only valid for the first 6 months or a year or something, or year it is giving me a year. Again, this is from March to March. That's the reason I said it's 6 months out here. Renewal of the SSL certificate, if this is not handled by you, it's handled by Microsoft. It'll be taken care by Microsoft. Again, SSL here is only valid for this particular domain. It is Azure websites.net. If you change the domain, the SSL certificate will not be valid. So if you are using the same custom domain given by Microsoft out here, this SSL certificate is now valid till, let's say, or this SSL certificate out here is valid till let's say the March. Valid till the March. After that, Microsoft is going to renew this out. If you are still using the same domain called Azure websites.net, it's the, let's say, responsibility of the cloud provider out here. Yes, any more questions here? Okay, now we have looked at what is a file transfer protocol mechanism, and again SSL is something that we need to, let's say, go into much deeper. We will go into that concept once the time comes out there. But what my intention here is that, see, FTP is not being used by a lot of people right now. FTP, to transfer your files, is not being used by a lot of companies right now. Reason being, a lot of companies today are not using the HTML code. The HTML. Reason being, HTML, though powerful, still very basic in nature. You cannot do something known as a server-side scripting. You cannot have a database. You cannot, there's a lot of limitations when you are, let's say, especially coming from a HTML background. HTML is good for basic web design and all that stuff, which is good enough. But if you want to do much more, you will have to, let's say, Azure tells you that, or any cloud provider tells you that please come down to a proper programming language. The reason why, there's something called as a programming language which really exists out here. Like, you have, let's start with a very basic C sharp, Java, .NET, Python, Golang. All these are programming languages out here. I'll start with something like C sharp, .NET, Java, Python, and whatever that you can think of. Ruby, Golang, PHP, whatever that you can think of. All these are now programming languages. And unlike HTML, programming languages are scripted or are written in something called as a high level language. HTML is a serialization syntax. When I say serialization, example, JSON. JSON is a serialization, meaning something which can be understood by this particular server directly. You don't have to do anything. The server will directly understand the format of JSON because it's serialization. If you look at a HTML template, let's go back into our HTML out here. And if I go inside this one, and if I open the index, just open this out, let's say. I'll just open this out with a notepad. All these are in an XML format. This is an XML. So JSON, XML are everything serialization in nature. These are serialization languages which can be understood by a server directly, and that's the reason I was able to just go ahead and copy my files into the server without having to do anything. I just copied, pasted it out, did an FTP using something like WinACP tool out here. But when you are moving towards a programming language like Java, C Sharp, and all these things, These are high level languages which cannot be understood by a destination server, like a virtual machine, like a web app. See, web app is again nothing but a virtual machine in the background only. Anything is nothing but a virtual machine in the background. Virtual machine again is nothing but a simple computer that is running on a cloud. Again, these high level languages cannot be understood by the operating system of your computer directly. They cannot be interpreted by the operating system of the computer directly, for which you need to convert this particular high level language to a low level language. And this low level language are called binaries. In a very simple, let's say, in a very simple language, zeros and ones. That's what a computer actually understands. Zeros, ones, and all these things, and serialization syntaxes and all these things. Again, if I need to do this, meaning firstly I need to write a particular program and then need to convert this particular program into a lower level language. If I want to achieve all these things, I need certain tools like Visual Studio. I'm not talking about the Visual Studio code that we are using. I'm talking about the full version of Visual Studio that we're using, that we will use. So we'll also talk about that. Or Eclipse. Especially when you're writing Java code, you have something called Eclipse. And if you're writing Python, you have something called PyCharm. You have Android Studio. You have a lot of, let's say, tools that will help you write, because writing a high level language is not easier. You'll have to come from something called OOPS background, object oriented programming, let's say, system, and all these things. Right? You'll have to understand that particular language. You'll have to write that language, and then you have to convert this particular language out here into a low level, let's say, format out here. Again, I am not here to, let's say, teach how do we write all these things. I'm, let's say, to teach what really happens out here when you write something like this. So we as a DevOps engineer, we do not really need to know how to write a high level language. We are not here to learn Java, C Sharp, and all these things out. But after it is written, how do we process it is something that we need to know. That's what we are here for. And in order to write this, in order to process all these things out, you need a tool. And in my case, let's say I'm writing .NET code. Let's say I'll take an example of .NET. In order to write that, you need to have a tool called Visual Studio. In my case, if you type Visual Studio, right, I have a 2019, I have Visual Studio Code. Again, code is a lighter version. Visual Studio 2019 is something that I'm, let's say, targeting out here. Again, the installation of this one is a little tricky. We'll also talk about how to install this particular software. Do you need to install the software? Do you don't need to install the software? Something that we'll look at. Again, since I have this already, I cannot uninstall it and install it. So I'm using a virtual machine. And this is a new brand new virtual machine. This is just created something. So I will go ahead, download and install this particular tool on this particular virtual machine, and let's understand what do we get out of it and all that stuff. So let's open the browser. Again, you can use any browser of your choice, Google Chrome, Firefox, whatever it is. Let me continue with this data, confirm and start browsing, and just go to Google search and just go to the search bar and say Visual Studio 2022. 2022 is the latest version. In here, as and when you type in Visual Studio 2022, you'll get a first link called visualstudio.microsoft.com. So let me say maybe later. Microsoft.com. This is the first link called Visual Studio IDE, Integrated Development Environment. I'll click on this one, and this will go ahead and say it is in selling code faster, work faster, and all that stuff. And then I have the Visual Studio. It says download Visual Studio out here. And as when I click on this one, it has three different editions: Community, Professional, and Enterprise. Community is a free version. Enterprise and Professionals are paid versions out here. It's a licensed version. We don't really need that. For our demos, we just need the community edition of this. Just click on this one and I'll say, okay, fine. I will download a setup file for you. It's a 2 MB setup file that I downloaded. And after it downloads, just go wherever it downloads out here. In my case, it downloaded in this particular folder called downloads. Just double click on this and it will start the installer. It's not installing, it's starting the installer out here. So once it starts the installer, let me wait for it, and it's saying Visual Studio installer. Do you want to continue? I'll say continue. Yes. It's just going ahead verifying it out, and it is installing the installer itself. It's a very big software. It's just installing the simple installer out here, and then it'll load a couple of things out here for me. So let's give it a second, and once it's ready, let's see how we can get started. Again, this is the very first page that you get, and what I want you all to do is that we mostly learn about .NET out here. So click on this one called ASP.NET and Web Development, Azure Development. Just scroll down. There is something called .NET Desktop Development out here. These are the workloads. Just click on these three things and hit the install button. And if you try to install this out, total space required is around 11.81 GB. It's a very big software. It's a very big software. Again, my suggestion for everyone is that if your computer doesn't have enough space, enough RAM, please do not install this out. It will occupy a lot of space in your computer. Your computer has to have at least about 8 GB of RAM to install this out here. If you install it on 4 GB or 2 GB, it will become very slow. And again, just for this demo, I don't want you to install this out. We are doing just 1 or 2 demos with this particular software. But again, if you want to practice it, like me, just create a virtual machine, Windows 10, install it on a virtual machine. Once you're done, delete it out. Nothing harm. So just click on the install button, and this will take good amount of time to install it out here. Again, it's a very big software. It will take good amount of time to get this installed. And in my case, I have a Visual Studio 2019, like same thing, but an older version of the same thing out there. The UI, everything is the same. So again, if your computer supports this out, make sure you can install you feel free to install this out. If it doesn't, the other option, go to a virtual machine, install there. If you want that particular virtual machine to be for a day or two, stop that virtual machine at the end of the day. Again, tomorrow start it out and then start using the software. Finally, when you're done, you can delete this out. We don't use the software much. As a DevOps engineer, on a daily basis, I don't even touch this. I don't even touch this out. On a daily basis, as a DevOps engineer, I go ahead and use Visual Studio Code. Yes, I do a lot of, let's say, Visual Studio Code, like write my PowerShell, write my ARM templates, and etc. using Visual Studio Code. But as a DevOps engineer, we also need to understand what are the challenges faced by a development team. So we just need to understand how the development team actually goes ahead and does this. So it will take some time. Let me